Good morning. It's so good to see you. Hey, I feel like it's the 80s again, right? You're driving in a Trans Am with a mullet. That guy didn't have one, but I did. I hope you guys had a great Christmas. Hey, can you do me a favor before we get started? We have a family that's just been, going through this grief and this mourning of losing their son, the Dyson family. If you could just continue to be praying for that family. They lost a husband, a dad, a son, a grandson, a friend. So just if you'd continue to pray for that family as part of the greater family that they're a part of here at Bethany, we would really appreciate that as they're going through a ton of grief and a ton of mourning as they just did their service yesterday, and they have a public service at the Tacoma Dome tomorrow. So if you could continue to pray for them, we would appreciate that. But I do hope that you had a great Christmas. We had a great Christmas. Christmas Eve service was incredible. We had almost 2,800 folks come through here, candlelight service, sang some Christmas songs, heard the Jesus story of his birth. It was so fun. So I hope you got a chance to enjoy your family, enjoy Christmas. And the crazy thing about Christmas is the day after Christmas, it feels like we're done, right? I pulled into my neighborhood yesterday. My neighbor's pulling down his Christmas lights already. I'm like, what? I live on until at least New Year's. That's like the rule, right? And I'm driving into church yesterday, and I'm like, I'll listen to a couple Christmas songs. The Christmas songs are off already. It's crazy. It's like Christmas is over. We're now moving into the new year. And everybody starts to immediately look at 2020. And then some of us start to reevaluate, though. We reevaluate, what happened in 2019, what was good, what was bad. We try and leave the bad stuff, and then we take the good stuff into 2020. And really this series that takes you back to the 80s with your tape deck really is about just that. It's about a fresh start. And it's about really looking at what your spiritual journey looked like in 2019, evaluating it, and then going, hey, what can look different, or how can we start different and move towards God on our spiritual journey. So we're hoping that this next 2 weeks, you're going to kind of be challenged to kind of look at your spiritual journey, and then move forward. And really, a lot of it is about just kind of changing the camera angle, or maybe changing the lens that you're looking at on your spiritual journey, and kind of reevaluating everything. And I really believe today we should probably start by looking at something I think really holds us back from our spiritual journey, and that's distraction. That's busyness. There's so much busyness going on in our world, in our life, and I really believe that really kind of hinders us or holds us back from that spiritual journey, from that growth that maybe we're hoping will happen. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. But when you think about distractions in life, I know for me, a lot of my life, I've kind of had this thing where I'm just on a one-track mind. Us guys are probably all like, yeah, I know. And people try and talk to you, and they got to get your attention. My family knows I got to get Dad's attention. If he's doing something else, whether it's something pointless or not, if I don't get his attention, I'm going to be responding by trying to fake it, right? Like, oh yeah, I totally was listening, yeah. And you're trying to fill in the blanks, and they go, no, I didn't say that. And it's just so hard. So I live in this world of distraction, just like you guys. I can remember driving and commuting to Seattle, and that was this time where when you commute, if you've ever commuted, a lot of times you kind of get in this, I've heard it called highway hypnosis, or this zoned out spot where sometimes you're driving along and you're not sure how you got the last 5 miles, which is kind of a scary thought to think about. I've never crashed doing this, by the way, but there's often times where I'd be like, wow, I'm 20 miles down the road. How'd that happen? And so there's often times when that would happen in my commute, and I started to listen to audio tapes, and back then it was actually tapes when I'd listen. It wasn't the Audible where you just plug in your phone, and so we'd listen to tapes and books, and I'd gotten into this book, and it was such a good book. I can't remember what it was, but it's just this good book. If you've ever gotten into a book and you just can't put it down, it was one of those books, except for I was listening to it as I drove. and kind of doing that highway hypnosis thing. And my journey, I'd take South I-5, Highway 18, 167 down to Puyallup, just like most people would. And I'm zipping along, and really the car almost would take me home on its own. It's almost like a Google car, right? No, but really I could zone out and just end up at home every day. And I'm into this book, and I'm going, and I kind of look up, see where I'm at on the journey, and I look around. I'm like, wow, this doesn't look familiar at all. This is like South Tacoma. This is not where I'm supposed to be. And so at that point, you're like, what do? You just take 512 and get home. I was about an hour late, and Michelle's like, what's going on? I'm like, hey, it's a good book. Calm down, right? It's just a good book. But that's kind of, I think, how we live our lives a lot of times. We go from thing to thing. We're busy. We're trying to fill more and more things into our life. And when there's an opening, we fill it. And we live this life of almost like a highway hypnosis life where we don't know what's happened to get from point A to point B in our day. And it kind of is scary, because where does God fit in to this life we live in, this culture of distraction? In this culture of distraction. When you think about this idea, a lot of us have struggled with this, and there's so many different things that we struggle with. There's so many things that take our time, that take our focus away from things. And some of them we have to do, right? We have to work. We have to pay bills. And then there's all these choices. Sometimes we choose to exercise. Sometimes we're on a health kick and we got to eat. We've got friends to invest in. Maybe there's sports that we feel like we have to watch, or maybe we play sports. We've got hobbies. And then there's all the social media that we can just eat up our time with. And I'm probably the only one that does this, right? But it just eats our time. There's books, TV, movies, and then all the social media that we can choose, all those channels. I don't even know them all anymore. It used to be Facebook, and that was it. Now it's Instagram and Snapchat and YouTube and Pinterest and whatever else, TikTok or something. I'm not even sure anymore. There's so many of them to choose from. We can just sit on our devices and just do this all day long if we want to. And it's so interesting. Those devices connect all that stuff in our lives. All the stuff we're doing and busyness and our friends and everything. And it made me interested in how often we use those devices. How often do we pick those things up? I read a stat on the internet. I'm sure it's true, right? Because it's on the internet. I looked it up, and it said, all right, every minute we look at our screens, on the average, this is average, maybe you guys are all better than the average, but 4.3 times per minute, which is 60 seconds, 4.3 times per minute we look, which if you add that up over a year, it's 81,500 times that we look at our screen. And so the point I want to make is that we live in distraction. We live in this busyness where any second we have, we can continue, we can be more busy, and it keeps our focus off of God. It keeps us from doing what God really wants us to do, which I believe is to kind of take a pause, to stop and be still. And that's what I want to look at today. There's a verse that I think is kind of the theme verse for today. It's out of Psalms 46:10, and it's a verse that it's simple, but it's a verse that I think can kind of help you to understand where God's coming from in this idea of distraction, what he thinks of distraction versus listening. It says, be still and know that I am God. It's very simple, right? Be still and know that I'm God. Or really the big idea to unpack in that is if we want to know God, you have to be willing to stop and be still. You have to be willing to listen. You have to be able to turn down the volume on everything that's going on in our lives. You have to be able to set down the device and take a break and listen to God and bring our eyes up and get out of the highway hypnosis of life that we might be living in. And I want to look at what the Bible says about this idea of distraction versus listening. I think the best place to go is what did Jesus teach, and then how did Jesus model this idea of stopping and being still and listening and knowing that God is God. How did he model this? Because that's really our perfect model of how we should live life, right? And so we're going to take a look at a story in Luke 10. If you brought your Bibles, you can turn there. It's a pretty common story, but it's a story about two sisters. These sisters that just hung out with Jesus. They were very close friends of Jesus. There's many stories about them being involved in Jesus' life. And it's just a simple story of them just hanging out. But like Jesus often does, he turns it into a teaching moment for them and then really for us. And so I want to take a look at that. It's in Luke 10:38. Their names are Mary and Martha. You may have heard of them. Their brother is Lazarus, and like I said, they spend a lot of time. So we're going to pick this up in verse 38. If you want to follow along, it says this. It says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. So Jesus is heading over to Martha's house, and I don't know, you've probably had a moment in the last year where you've probably hosted someone at your home, and you know all the preparations that go into having someone come and be hospitable to that person. It means picking up all the stuff in your home, making it look like you don't live in it again, cleaning up all the kitchen, cleaning everything, cleaning the toilets. You got to have a clean bathroom, and then prepping the food and getting that all ready. And they show up, and you're still working on the food. You're cooking. You're in the kitchen, and that's what Martha's doing as Jesus comes to hang out. And Mary is sitting there at Jesus' feet. And I'm sure Mary, being her sister, Martha's sister, often would help. And if you've ever done a job, done anything, this happens to me as a father all the time, where you're like, hey, I need some help on this project with my child, whichever one. I've got 4, so pick one, right? I need help with this. And I head outside to start working on it, and pretty soon I've done the whole project. And I come back into the house, and they're still like playing a video game, like, oh, I didn't know you needed my help, sorry. That's so frustrating when you're like doing a job that you expect to have someone help you on, and you end up doing it yourself. And Martha is in this situation where she's in that exact spot. I'm sure she's probably thrown out some passive-aggressive thoughts like, hey, this dinner's not going to make itself, trying to hopefully Mary will hear that, or who's going to set the table, things like that, trying to hopefully get her to help. And she gets so frustrated that she finally asks Jesus. She goes, Lord, don't you care? Don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. She's sitting over there at your feet. What's going to happen here? And the thing you have to understand about what Mary's doing in that culture, the posture of sitting at somebody's feet. We don't really do that a whole lot unless, like for me, I do it if I want a back rub. Sit back in like, hey, what's going on? Give me a little back rub. But no, that's not what they did back then. The culture back then, the posture was when you sit at a teacher's feet is really, you're trying to be a follower, or what they call a disciple of that teacher. And so she's trying to be a disciple and listen and sit at Jesus' feet. And look at what Jesus says in this moment as Martha's so frustrated. She's like, can't somebody help me? Can you help me? And Jesus answers only as Jesus can answer, right? He says, Martha, Martha, you're worried about and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better. Notice he doesn't say, Martha, you did the wrong thing, and Mary did the right thing. No, he said she just chose what is better. He put a higher priority on what Mary was doing, sitting at Jesus' feet, listening, being still. He said, Martha, that's good. That's great to serve. It's great to help. It's great to be hospitable. But sometimes you get too distracted. It says that she was distracted by all the preparations. Can you relate to that in your life? Being distracted by all the things going on, all the stuff you got to get done. And Jesus says, no, the priority, the value, the most important thing should be to be still and know that I'm God, to listen, to sit under me and learn from me. That's what he's trying to teach us in this moment. And I think if Jesus is so interested in us listening, then I wanted to go a step further. I wanted to look at, all right, so if he's so interested in that, how did he live his life? How did he model his life? If you look at Luke 5:16, just to start with, it says, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. It doesn't say every once in a while. It said often. It said this is a normal thing that Jesus pulled aside, withdrew to lonely places. And if you look all through the scriptures, all through the stories of Jesus, those 4 stories, what they call the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they all talk about this same exact thing. So I wanted to look at one of those authors. I want to look at Mark and look at how he looked at Jesus and how he pulled aside and he valued solitude. Because Mark, if you remember back when we did our series last year, Mark is this author that writes in this chaotic, this hurried version. He's jumping from story to story. He's so excited, and really he just wants to get people to the cross. He wants to tell people what he's experienced. The kingdom of God is so exciting that he wants people to understand that Jesus hung on that cross and died for you, for your sins, past, present, and future, for ours. And then he rose again so that we could have a relationship with this living God. He wants to get there, but in the midst of all that chaos and him just pushing forward and forward and forward, he takes pauses in his book and shows us a glimpse of how Jesus found solitude and how it was important. So I want to look at that. If you look, I'm going to put some scriptures up there and just look at some different places in Mark where Jesus got away and spent time. Mark 1:12, just after he was baptized, John the Baptist had baptized him. Mark 1:12, he gets out for 40 days in the wilderness, and of course he was tempted by Satan, but the point is he got away for 40 days. Mark 1:35, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Mark 2:13, once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. Notice once again, this is something he did all the time, as the author writes, this is normal for Jesus. Mark 6:46, after Jesus had dismissed the crowds, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was still there alone. See, the point is Jesus constantly was getting away. He was finding time to recharge and refresh. And maybe you're thinking, well, Jesus, back then, he had plenty of quiet time and silence, and maybe he was almost like a monk or something. But really, that's not the case. If you read those gospel stories, those stories talk about how the crowds followed Jesus. They wanted to touch him. They wanted to hear from him. They wanted to be around him because he was a draw. And so he had to make it a priority to get away. He had to find time on his own to pull away from the people and to recharge and refresh. And you might be thinking also, well, that's Jesus. That's Jesus. That's the Son of God. That's the 100% God, 100% man. I'm not Jesus. I'm just this ordinary person. How am I supposed to be like Jesus? Well, I want to tell you how ordinary people, his 12 very best friends, his disciples, and how they valued this same exact thing and how they learned from Jesus by spending time with him. In Mark 6, Jesus sends those 12 disciples out on a mission. They go out on a mission, they come back. And you would think, for me, if I was out on a vacation, on a project, on a job, I come back, there's going to be all kinds of other stuff I've got to do when I get back. I got a list. I missed out on all this. I got to check my emails. I got stuff going on. I got to make sure I catch back up. But when he gets back, Mark 6:30-32, he says to his friends, he says, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. You see, Jesus and his disciples understood what it meant to withdraw. Those ordinary men, those fishermen, those tax collectors, they understood what it meant to get away because they needed to recharge and refresh also. But why is it now so hard to find that still, that quiet, that silence? I don't know if you've ever played a game called the Quiet Game. I think it's a game made up by parents to try and get their kids to be quiet, but it seems universal. I don't know. My kids played it, and it's funny to watch your kids play the game because the game's pretty simple. If you don't know what it is, you just basically say, all right, we're going to start this game in a second. The next person that talks loses, and it's the quiet game. And it's so funny to watch kids because it's so hard for them to stay quiet. It's almost like they're holding their breath, and when they run out of breath, they just have to make noise and be loud again. It's like a minute or less, and they're laughing or they said something or whatever. Why is it so hard for us in our culture to be quiet? I really think, and I've read from many authors this, that we fear silence, that we fear what we will see when we look in the mirror, when we see what we've become. We see what we truly are when no one else is watching. I really believe that we fear that. There's an author that wrote about this. His name's Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was back in about 90 years ago, back when Adolf Hitler was around, and he was in Germany writing about that, and he was fighting against that whole situation, and he wrote some incredible books if you want to read anything about discipleship. But he wrote this about this idea of getting away and being still. He said, where is it? We are so afraid of silence that we chase ourselves from one event to the next, in order not to have to spend a moment alone with ourselves, in order not to have to look at ourselves in the mirror. You see, even back then, you might think, well, they didn't have media, they didn't have TVs, they didn't have phones. There's a lot more time. Even back then, people were trying to go from thing to thing and fill their time, fill their lives with stuff. And he says, you know what? Even then, people were afraid to look in the mirror at themselves. They're afraid of what they'd see because they're afraid of quiet. They're afraid of silence. And you know, when you think about who you are, some of us are introverted, some of us are extroverted, some of us meet somewhere in the middle. And so for some of us, it's pretty easy to be alone. We like to be alone. And then for some of us, we're more fired up when we're with people. But either way, when you get alone, I think there's a key to being silent. It's to shutting everything else off. Because there's so many things that we can just be by ourselves and kind of focus in on, whether it's our devices, whether it's a book, whether it's just our thought life. There's a lot of things that we can focus in on. And what Jesus was modeling, what the disciples were modeling was actually to shut everything else off and to focus on God and to listen and to pray and to look at what the creator of the universe has made. And that's how you hear from God. And you might be thinking, well, I can't really hear from God. That's true. I don't think a lot of times we're hearing audibly from God, but we can hear from him through his scriptures. We can hear from him through friends. We can hear from him through his creation. But we don't get to that if we don't find the time to sit and be quiet. And I've found this to be really valuable in my life as I've kind of tried to journey with God and figure out what it looks like to spend that quiet time with him, whether it's a daily time or whether it's a longer period where I'm getting away for a little bit of time by myself. And what I've found is it takes a little bit of time to kind of flush things out before I really can focus in on who God is and what he means to me. And so some days, I get 15 minutes and that's okay. But some days I get half a day or a day, and man, it's so valuable. It's so valuable. So I want to challenge you this morning as we think about this idea of moving into 2020 and taking a fresh start on our spiritual journey. And maybe you've been listening and you're thinking, man, I am super busy. I'm super distracted. I do need to focus in and figure out and prioritize when I can actually get some time with God. But maybe for some of us here, our spiritual journey, we're still on the starting line, and we're like, I'm not even sure how to take the first step right now. It's just, I'm just trying to figure it out. And I just want to tell you, that's okay. That's okay if that's where you're at. But I would challenge you, if that's where you're at, to really consider your fresh start might be saying, I need to start with Jesus. I need to start that relationship that he's offering, that the God of the universe is offering, that relationship to just start and get going in 2020. And it's so simple to do. If you've already done it, you know how simple it is. It's just really, I always say it's so easy a child could do it, or it's just like doing your ABCs. That's an easy way to remember it. It's admit that I'm a sinner, I struggle, I can't do life on my own. Believe that God did what he said he would do, and then commit your life to him. Say, I can't do it anymore on my own, I need your help. If that's you, I hope you would consider that as we move into 2020. But if you've been on this journey for a while and you're ready to kind of figure out what's my fresh start look like, maybe it's kind of taking a look at where you prioritize your choices. I've talked to so many people that'll say, man, I just don't even know where I'd fit God in. There's so much stuff going on. My kids get up at 5 a.m. and we're just going all day. We're just go, 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 go. I don't know how to fit it. And I just wonder if maybe some of those choices we're making throughout the day aren't just have-tos, but they're choices. Just like the choice that Mary made to sit at Jesus' feet versus do what you would think everybody else would want to do, is take care of their host, their guest. Maybe that's where you need to look, is do I need to moderate? Do I need to make some priority changes and say, the thing that's most important in my life right now, it isn't Jesus. And I need to prioritize that in my life so that I can start to find that time to be still and know that God's God. Because if you remember the big idea, if we want to know God, we have to be willing to stop and be still. And so this morning, I want to give you a chance as we go into 2020 just to take 30 seconds and just be still. Just to start right now and have that 30 seconds. And if you're that person I described as the person that needs to just start their relationship with God, maybe that's when you do it. Maybe you just pray to God right then. I need help. Can you come into my life? But maybe for some of us it's just help me figure out where I can fit this into my life. What's the best spot for this, God? Where can I be still more so that I can recharge and refresh? Because I want to know you. I desperately want to know you more. So we're gonna take about 30 seconds here, and then I'm gonna end in prayer, and then the band will come out and we'll sing another song and stuff. But I really would encourage you as we take this time to take it serious, and start fresh in 2020. What if 2020 you shut out the distractions and you made God a priority. What if that happened? Let's take 30 seconds right now. Father, it's so hard to be quiet and to be still, but yet you model this for us. You model it, you teach it, and you value it as a high priority, as the most important. And God, we just pray right now that you would show us where that fits in our busy lives, in our distracted lives. And you would show us how to set aside some of that distraction, that busyness, and make room for you as we move into 2020, God. God, we love you and we want to know you more. So help us to be still. We pray this all in your name.